Okay, yeah. So hello everyone. I'm Willem. I'm going to be your educator today. So with the motion about Sibyl System, uh, just for like mic check and gender pronoun preference, I would just like to go around the room and just introduce, like let everyone introduce themselves and prefer gender pronoun if any, starting from opening government and speaking order. Nggak perlu say speaking order, but yeah, sure. Yeah. OG.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
I
I think we're losing you a bit.
Okay, if you want to POI, please turn on your microphone and deliver your POI.
Okay.
I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Within current status quo, that most likely there is a crime, for instance, that will hurt someone or even and also hurt someone, for example, and also that there is a crime that who haven't been caught, for example, looking on how case of shooting of Colleger, for example, in 1999, for example, we think that it becomes problematic. We do believe that there is a people who are not caught, for example, there is a criminality who are not caught, for example, for the coming from the police, for example, or so on so far. We think that the every criminal in itself will still doing a crime, for example, for their people that will be increased to other people in the end of the day, because that's they still not caught, for example, and there is no punishment, for example, for themselves at the very beginning, right? We think that it will increase the number of criminality in our country. We think that it will harm for our country to begin with, because there is people who hurt, for example, that coming from the uh, criminality in itself, right? Why then our status quo is enough? The moment government claim that our status quo is enough, like there is a police, for example, or so on so far, we think that it is not exclusive, right? Why? It is because that the police, for example, or even there is a punishment, for example, is also there is a under outside the house. But we think why we are used the under civil system is because that it is not exclusive, for example, that it is not enough, like there is a people or even there is a criminality that still doing that still not caught, for example, for the police in itself. We think that it's not enough. That is why our step is so clear that we prefer to live under civil system in order to protect the society at the very beginning, right? So let's begin in my substantive. So to things in my speech, first of all, why the civil system work and why civil system is important. Second, I'm going to tell you why it is justified if we live in under civil system to begin with, right? So let's begin in my substantive. How the civil system work and why civil system is important. Member of the house, we do believe that civil system in itself is the system. The moment that the system in itself is made or even made that coming from the government, for example, exactly the civil system in itself will managed, for example, by the government also, right? What does it mean? It means that the moment there is a if the government claim that there is a people who are become the target, for example, because that there is a manipulating, for example, with the civil system, we think that it is not exist under outside the house, because that the government are doing using the civil system in itself by the government itself, right? And second of all, we do believe that civil system is a system that highly for example, artificial intelligence that supervises each and every individual inside the country, meaning that all of form, for example, of the crime, we think that will be known, for example, by the government at the very beginning. We think that all of the government will see about how the criminality is there, for example, or even how the criminality in itself is doing a crime, for example, toward the someone at the very beginning, right? Exactly, it will create more protection, for example, toward the individual at the very beginning, right? Second of all, crime coefficient in itself is calculated likelihood can individual committing a crime, for example, or even there is a committing coming from the other individual to gain, for example, the individual to hurt someone, for example. We think that there is a civil system in itself can claim, for example, that coming from the government to do so, right? We think that is the system civil system is work in the end of the day, right? Understanding that is the civil system work, why the civil system is important under three reasons. First of all, the civil system in itself will be protect the society. Why? Because the civil system in itself is all of the people, for example, will use about the on how the civil system in itself can protect themselves. For example, that like there is a violence that coming from the other people, or even there is a violence that coming from the criminality, for example, we think that the government will know how give them punishment, for example, toward the society or even toward the crime in itself, because that they was give hard, for example, coming from the criminality at the very first place, right? Second of all, we do believe that it will create a prevent of criminality that coming from the other people. Why? Because understanding that Sibyl system in itself is work, we think that the Sibyl system it will know about how the deterrent effect, for example, for the individual in itself. If they are not cuffed, for example, we think that they will cuff in the end of the day, because that there is a Sibyl system in their body, for example, so on so far. We think that it will create more effective, for example, to create prevent the crime at the very beginning. We think that it will decrease, for example, the number of crime or even the number of crime toward the society or even toward the other people at the very beginning. Third of all, we think that exactly that Sibyl system in itself is become tools of the government itself, because that the government in itself will be easily to make it protect the society, because the tools government in itself is become used by the government to see about the how the victim in itself is there, for example, or even there is a violence is there, for example, or even there is a the violence in itself is going to happen in the of the house, right? We think that it will become tools to government in the end of the day, right? Understanding that, we think that the moment the Sibyl is work, we think that it is also important toward the government at the very beginning, right? And in my second substantive, why it is justified for us to prefer to live under Sibyl system. Let's look at first an idea condition of individual. Going to the first, what is the interest of individual? We do believe that the individual has the interest to give their body, for example, to protect themselves at the very beginning. Second, we do believe that the individual has the interest to not gain, to not get, for example, that crime, for example, that coming from other people, or even they are not get, they do not want get violence, for example, or even harassment, sexual harassment, or so on so far, that will be earned by themselves, right? And third of all, we do believe that the individual has the interest to become peaceful, for example, for the other people, or even they are not get the crime at all, right? Understanding that, we think that the idea of the ideal condition of the individual, it will be more likely to be happen under outside of the house, because why? Under three things. First of all, the Sibyl system in itself is more likely to be work. For example, we think that Sibyl system in itself will be directly improved, for example, for themselves, to see about how then he is not how he is not he is will give or even known about their current their heart, for example, or even their violence, for example, so on so far, because the individual itself will be keep protecting, for example, for the government or even for the government itself, right? It shows to you that individual itself, or even if that individual in itself will get their body get their own, for example, we think that it will have for themselves at the very beginning, because that individual inside the moment they are used the moment there is a crime that doing criminality toward the government, we think that it will create more harm to the society at the very beginning. Understanding that, we think that it is justified for us to live under civil system purpose.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech. Now to open the case from opposition, I call upon the leader of all. You're here. Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech. Now to continue on the case from opening government, I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, wait, I'm prepare my cam first. If you have POI, please turn on your microphone and deliver your POI. Okay. I will start my speech. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Member of the house, what you need to understand that crime is still crime. Whatever,
Hello?
if you hello, wait. Am I audible? Hello.
Yeah, you are audible. Is there something? Wait. Tadi yang bilangnya, wait, is there something wrong? Ariel? Never mind. Okay. Yeah, you're audible. Okay. Yeah, you can restart your speech. Just the first 15 seconds anyway.
Okay, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Remember the house. What you need to understand that crime is still crime. Whatever you want to fulfill by the crime, we think that this is still crime. For example, this is, for example, unprofitable toward the other people, Mr. Mujis. That's why we think that with this thing, for example, in this system, for example, will detect that this crime, Mr. Mujis. But secondly, we think that we also give the for example, like a rehabilitation toward this. For example, these people, for example, who will doing this crime, for example, but with this system we have see this kind of the this kind of the people in itself, Mr. Munchers. But move toward the rebuttal, they say that with this thing, for example, it will going to create a forcement at the very first place, Mr. Munches. We don't think so, right? Why? Because first one is going to happen you should do, for example, with this thing, for example. But we think that under process still there's the, for example, knowing, for example, knowledge with this, for example, like knowledge with this kind of the system in itself, for example, how this system, for example, work, for example, because with this thing it will create a good things and in the future, for example. That's why I think that there's no the forcement will going to be happen, Mr. Monches. But secondly, even if there's the forcement, for example, we think it's still okay. Why? Because sometimes good things, for example, needs forcement, for example, in your for example, when you children, for example, and your parents do for example do good thing, for example, but we think you don't need, for example, but we think that this screen will going to give forcement because you have should to do, Mr. Munches. That's why I think that forcement it's still okay, Mr. Munches. And then in this debate, I will bring two things. Firstly, why it will going to give it will become a preventive action at the very first place, but and second of all, why this kind of the preventive action will give beneficial and also important, Mr. Munches. Firstly, we think that this Sibyl system, for example, is very proper, right? For example, become a crime coefficient, for example, and so on and so forth, Mr. Munches. We think that we need this kind of the system at the end of the day, because why? Because the higher number of the, for example, crimes at the very first place, Mr. Munches. But we think that this thing will become a preventive action toward the government, for example, in face of the crime in itself, Mr. Munches. Why? Because this system prevent people to do this crime, Mr. Munches. For example, they want to kill, for example, they want to kill the other people, Mr. Munches. We think that this system only detected them, Mr. Munches. For example, they see about the mentality, for example, they see about the emotional, for example, and so on and so stuff. We think that this thing will going to be beneficial, for example, the moment there's the, for example, like crime in itself. That's why I think that this kind of the thing itself is very beneficial at the end of the day, Mr. Munches. But comparatively under their self, the house, we think that they only, for example, there's no preventive action toward this kind of the things in itself. For example, they only rely toward the territory, for example, in the police, for example, and so on and so stuff. We think that our authority, for example, will cannot counter all of the society, for example, who doing this crime in itself. For example, in India, for example, there is a gang rape, for example, continuously happen, Mr. Mrs. That's why we think that with this thing will never give protection toward the toward the society, for example, because for example in India also for example becoming and continues to happen this gang rape, Mr. Mrs. That's why we think that this yes, even if there's the policy, for example, there's the, for example, like territory who will punish them, for example, but we think that this thing happen after there's the victim, Mr. Ramchis. Why? Because, for example, the moment there's the killing of, for example, like there is people killing someone, for example, and they get punishment, but we think that these people already die, Mr. Ramchis. That's why we think that there's no preventive action under the side of the house, Mr. Ramchis. But secondly, because this high number of the crime in itself, of the country itself, because that we need this kind of the system at the very beginning, Mr. Amramchers. And but secondly, why it's also decreasing the number of crime, Mr. Amramchers? Because our society already know, for example, the moment they create they won't create a crime, for example, this system already detected them, Mr. Amramchers. That's why we think that our society will afraid to do them, Mr. Amramchers. That's why we think that this system is very, for example, is very good to under our side of the house, Mr. Amanches. And but certainly, why this is important? For example, firstly, we think that we, as the society, for example, we need the protection. For example, we need the prevent protection toward our with our government, for example. No, thanks. With our government, for example. Yes, we think that with this system, for example, we prevent society, for example, prevent for example, people who doing the crime in itself, for example. We think that that's the time we think that it can also decreasing the chance of the crime in itself, for example. The moment we think that, and for example, the moment opposite talk about because the moment they are, for example, they doing a crime to fulfill their basic needs, for example, we think that this thing not on one of the, for example, way to do so, Mr. Amchis. We think that they can work, for example, because our government already give the jobs toward our society, for example. For example, we think that this kind of the things that only give the big space toward the crime in itself to do so, Mr. Amchis. That's why under that side will going to be a bad at the end of the day, Mr. Amchis. That's why we think that this kind of the things itself, for example, will give the protection, for example, will decreasing the crime, for example. That's why we need this kind of the system in itself in our society, Mr. Amchis, because with this thing we can prevent, for example, we can decreasing the victim of the, for example, even in the best case, for example, they will going to there is the decreasing of the gang rape in India, for example. We think that it's very good under our side of the house, Mr. Manchis. That's why we propose this motion. Thank you.
Wait, I was muted, sorry. So we thank the speaker for that speech. Now to continue the case from UP, I call the deputy leader of UP.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, preferred gender pronouns, she, they, please just chat for POIs. I promise I will read it. Give me a second to arrange my papers. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 3. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let's talk about what's the most important actor here in this debate, right? That the opening government seems to ignore. It's actually humans living in society themselves, right? Well, the one characteristic that they seem to ignore is that humans are very unreliable, right? What they think and what they do are simply not connected. You don't know why your crush thinks foot fetish is great. You wouldn't know why a teenager thinks stealing is a good thing. These are kind of things that you cannot quantify, and you cannot measure that anyone who has a certain thought equals to the certain same thing. That is the very reason why it is so dangerous to easily generalize that as every single criminal thought will in the end result to some sort of criminal action, right? Because that is not the case in status quo. Just because you think that you're going to steal something, just because you think that you're going to kill someone, does not mean you actually are going to do it. And that is something the opening government and later on the closing government has the burden to answer, why it is okay to easily assume and generalize this thing. Here on the opening opposition, from the very beginning, we've already mentioned that it is very, very bad for us to just assume based on their thought that they're going to actually result in this action. Because what is so harmful about this Sibyl system is that you don't even have to do the action here. That is something OG ignore. You don't even have to do the action. You can just have a sort of criminal thought. You can immediately already get caught. You can immediately go into detention and everything, right? But then without any proper proof. So which is why they need to actually prove to this, and otherwise their entire case will fall, right? What one singular rebuttal I will bring towards opening government is that notice how the majority of prime minister's speech is very repetitive, right? Basically, all they do is talk again about how they're gonna imprison everyone who's a criminal, but I've already proven to you how then having criminal thoughts won't actually equal to criminal actions, right? And that is something they haven't responded until the very end of their case. Any new analysis brought by the deputy prime minister is basically about prevention, protection, and everything. Two responses towards this. First, regarding how that kind of mechanism already exists in status quo, right? The criminal justice system already brings you towards prevention, how people do not want to go to jail, which is why they don't do crime. About protection, how the police actually exist, the correct police actually exists to actually protect people from crime and from getting hurt and from getting killed, etc. Right? So they need to prove to us why then this extra measure is actually needed when the kind of benefits they promise to us already exist in status quo, right, judges? Second of all, my second response is regarding how when this kind of things already exist, this kind of extra measure they're going to take is actually worse. It's actually going to worsen the scenario, right? You're not going to actually help the people. You're going to make them scared, right? You're going to actually make them think that every single thing I'm going to do is wrong. And I will actually explain how that is going to be like, how harmful that is going to be like in my first extension regarding how the Sibyl system will personally impact people's process of thought, right? This is also going to directly clash on their points of prevention, right? Let's try to recharacterize the Sibyl system, right? You don't even have to do crime. If you have a single thought that actually goes derivative from the actual societal norm, it's going to be stamped as something wrong. It's going to be stamped as something criminalized, and you're going to immediately get caught and get thrown into jail or get thrown into rehab without any chance to actually explain yourself, right? This means that it means that any kind of thought that derives from the societal norm, let's say that it is actually a norm for people to it is actually a norm for people to think that, oh, every man has to marry a woman, but if someone who's gay exists in their side of the world exists, it's going to be against the norm and they're going to be stamped as a crime, right? That is actually what's going to happen, right? This is going to lead into the lack of critical thinking that happens in the government side of the house, right? Because let's acknowledge critical thinking actually sometimes goes against their norm, right? What's going to happen on their side? They're not going to actually prevent people from doing crime. They're going to actually prevent people from doing anything at this case, right? They're going to prevent people from actually being able to think outside the box. They're going to prevent people from actually thinking beyond what government wants them to think or beyond what the people teaches you in the textbook, right? So how is this actually going to impact humanity in the long term, right? When the world is actually forever changing, right? People actually need to change according with the times, right? But because on their side of the house, people are not even allowed to think something that is opposing from the norm, right? We think that what's going to happen is that people are going to be satisfied. People are going to be forced to be satisfied with the current status quo, right? They're going to be like, oh, my life cannot improve more than this because if I think anything that is a slightly bit against the government, I am actually going to get kidnapped. I'm actually going to get jailed and everything. So people will just stick into the status quo, right? What's going on? A further analysis on this is that this can also be used by the government to actually shut up all those criticisms against the government, right? If the government wants to, for an example, create some sort of law that is actually going to punish the people, such as law that you have to serve in the military, you only are able to have only sons, women are only able to work in the household, that kind of law can exist because anyone who dares question the government will be stamped as a criminal and will be taken into jail and will be imprisoned without any proper explanation why. So on their side of the house, everyone's going to live under this kind of authoritarian regime, right? But second analysis is that second layer is that people are going to live in this kind of without any kind of growth forward, right? If this kind of Sibyl system exists and people generally does not have any kind of critical thinking, what's going to happen? We're not going to move forward. We're not going to create new inventions. We're not going to create new ideologies and everything, right? Well, what happens when we actually need this kind of sudden change? let's take a look where we're currently facing like a global warming. We need some sort of solution to actually help here. But then anyone who thinks of something that is not according to what the government wants you to think is going to get caught, right? People won't think of new ideas. And what's going to happen is that these kind of problems that we actually need to fix is going to actually be unable to be fixed. It's going to happen on the government side of the house, which is why we believe this kind of fear of people not being able to think outside the box, this kind of fear of people not wanting to think something, any bit of thing against the government for the fear of being thrown into jail is simply very harmful towards humanity, right? And that is something that maybe the closing government can help light into this debate. But I believe here in the opening opposition, that is something we do not want to happen, which is why we think status quo is already enough. But towards the second extension, right, how the peaceful society promised by this Sibyl system is actually not permanent, right? Where the government, or when a government implements a system, it needs to be permanent, right? But what's going to happen here with the Sibyl system is it's going to be something very temporary, right? You don't teach current status quo criminal justice system is not only about punishment, it's also about retribution, where afterwards you can return back into society. It's about teaching the people a lesson, right? Where you can show them that, oh, this thing is wrong, which is why you should actually not do it. And but people have certain reasonings to do everything, right? But here what happens on their side of the house is that people won't even get to learn, right? And they immediately get caught. They immediately take any kind of thought that goes against the government will immediately make them go into jail. It means they cannot actually learn from their mistakes. They cannot actually learn for a kind of change because you immediately imprison them and they will never see the light of day, right? What's going to happen on their side is that humanity is just going to go downfall and downfall. In the end, it's going to be what, 3 or 4 people left who simply has no critical thinking brain cells or anything that's going to be left in this world, because everyone else is going to be thrown into jail. And which is why here in the opening opposition, we strongly oppose this motion. Thank you.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech. Now to open the closing debate, I call upon the member of government.
Am I audible?
Hah? Reaksi gue kenapa?
Hello, am I clear?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay, cool. For POI, you can just unmute yourself, and if I don't react to your POI, means that your POI is rejected. And if I let you, then you can say your POI as quick as possible. My gender pronunciation, you can use she or her. And I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. What we think that opposition bring to you, that they only think the worst case of this system, ladies and gentlemen. They only think that the systems are going to kill everyone. The systems are going to imprison everyone with unreasonable reason, ladies and gentlemen, to begin with. And we believe that in this scenario, this is what not going to be happen, ladies and gentlemen. And our opening government already failed to give us a clear system that what we prefer to, ladies and gentlemen. That's why member of government going to tell you about what we want to do. So why we prefer this Sibyl system, because with Sibyl system means that we are utilize the artificial intelligence, ladies and gentlemen, to supervise each people, individual in the state, to see and monitor and also supervisor everyone minds and mentality, ladies and gentlemen. This means what? Means that we are going to see through what inside people mind. We are going to see that these people in stable mindset or not. We see that these people have psychotic mentality or they are in the fine mentality. Means that if we are using this technology, we are not going to only uncarefully just imprison anyone just because you have indicate for something. Means that using this technology, we are going to do the investigation more detailed, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to have more detailed and specified data, ladies and gentlemen, to investigate, to criminalize, to give a proper punishment to each other people, ladies and gentlemen. Means that we are also can conduct a more transparent investigation toward the crime itself. These are going to uphold our criminal justice system. So it's not what the opposition said that we are going to just shamelessly kill and also imprison everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Because what? To start this debate again, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to characterize you that in status quo, we are facing two problems, ladies and gentlemen. First problem is we are facing human, ladies and gentlemen. In society, we have a lot of human with abstract and also unpredictable mind, ladies and gentlemen, especially in this era, ladies and gentlemen. People can have heart to kill each other inhumanly, ladies and gentlemen. Like you see a lot of news that father have heart to kill each own daughter, and then couple can brutally kill her girlfriend or boyfriend, and things like that, ladies and gentlemen. There's a lot of this kind of news, ladies and gentlemen, that we can predict, ladies and gentlemen, because we are only human, ladies and gentlemen. And these kind of crimes are increased day by day, ladies and gentlemen, because we cannot prevent it, ladies and gentlemen, because it happens start from the mentality, ladies and gentlemen. And second problems, we see that in our criminal justice system, we see that our police, our prosecutor are failed to do a proper investigator, ladies and gentlemen, because we cannot see through what inside people minds, ladies and gentlemen. We cannot predict, because we are only human. Even though we can predict, ladies and gentlemen, we tend to use a bias to the we tend to have a bias assessment, ladies and gentlemen. That's why we want to use the Sibyl system. Sibyl system, we're going to help us to provide more detail, more stable data, and also can help us in assessing what we should do to the people who do crime, ladies and gentlemen. This kind of technology you can use apa namanya, you can compare it to the system that we are already used, such as like lie detector. Lie detector can detect people who lie or not through the artificial intelligence. This kind of mechanism we want, listeners. So Sibyl system are going to help the police, going to help the government to detect what is in people mind, listeners. So this scenario not going to be worse like what opposition said, listeners. That's why we are still going to preserve the Sibyl system. So second things that we, after telling you the problems, why we say that this is better and why this is justified, is 2 points. Because first, Sibyl system, it's not controlling, it's only monitoring, and only take action depend on the assessment system. Means that we are not going to recklessly kill people just because indicate, but we still going to do the detailed assessment system, because we use the technology. Means the technology can help us better assessment rather than just human assessment, because human also have a bias often, and this is more dangerous system. And also we see that this trade-off are better, ladies and gentlemen, because we see that right now why we prefer this system, that we are right now fighting to protect the vulnerable actor. Vulnerable actor who, the people who have no power. That's why we need this technology. Our government are not going to be recklessly just because they have an intention to shut people down, and then we are going to use this technology. We believe that our government is the one who we choose as a society. Means that we are choosing the accountability person. Means that what opening opposition side said also only happen in the worst case. Means that there are only little chance, because in government we see that there is also a lot of people are going to check and balance, so the worst case scenario will more likely going to be happen. Second thing why this justify that also that this system are happen and also controlled by the only authorized stakeholder. Means that there is only the trustworthy stakeholder that can access to this data, so the society can rest assured that they are not going to be misuse their information and stuff, ladies and gentlemen. And these are going to be work, ladies and gentlemen, in status quo, because this is what we need right now, ladies and gentlemen. Our criminal justice system have a lot of problems, and we need a lot of an efficient system, ladies and gentlemen. And why opening government cannot apprehend in this case, because first they already failed to characterize the real problems, and they also fail to tell us what is in stakeholder right now, and they are not tell us on how this is going to solve the problems of the settlement, and what they tell you only the assumption. That's why we are proudly to open this debate for closing government. Thank you.
Okay, we thank the speaker for the speech. Now to open the closing up, I call upon the member of opposition. Sorry.
Panel. So here in the closing opposition, we say that this debate should be played from the perspective of the people of the nations, in which that we all agree that we want a safe and a peaceful society that have no crimes. But with the rising of these systems, it really creates a controversial between the pro and the contra side. So ideally, the status quo that we want is that ideally is the status quo right now, in which that where only there is law and like law enforcement and government and some other authorities to actually punish and some technologies, but not certainly like Sibyl system or like maybe like psychology people to actually predict and prevent the rising of the criminal itself. So we don't want the rising of the Sibyl system itself. So first, before moving on to my argument, I'll be doing some rebuttals towards the opening government and then closing government and then moving on to my argument. So firstly, rebuttal towards the opening government. The opening government is talking about like the government, the system is work when like the government will see the crimes takes place, and it's like the tool used by the government to track and detect the crime itself. And exactly because of this system is used by the government, and we certainly know that the status quo here is that the law sometimes may be quite injustice, and that those who actually control and make the law is some kind of law. So this government who we allow them to actually use this system, it's kind of like exploiting their authority and resulting in the oppression of individual itself. This is exactly because the tool used by the government itself, it's very unpredictable, because as people, as individuals in the grassroots base, we cannot actually know what's the government intention, what's exactly the parameter of like crime itself used by this machine itself. Later I'll be justified in my argument. And then talking about from the opening government as well, talking about the systems is actually to prevent crime, but like we say that what's the purpose of the law itself, even if we say that, even we acknowledge that the law itself is actually like flawed and injustice, but we still respect and we still actually want the law to act, and other like police actually to regulate this criminal. So like the systems kind of like sometimes maybe potentially flawed. So is there like any law that we want to question, is there any law we will regulate the crime done by the systems or prevent the flaw present by the system? Since we say that government is so stubborn and very dependable in these systems, and hence, if this system is used, society could not critique the systems, since the system seen as something perfect and high advanced system. So that's why government just do what exactly the system is told you to do, even if there is something flawed and something wrong within the systems. Moving on to rebuttals to the closing government. Closing government talk about like because we cannot predict people's mind, what's exactly in people's minds, so that's why we use this system. But here in our side, exactly because we cannot predict people's mind, but sometimes we say that people's mind can be unpredictable. But what is the right to see like people's every single person and actually detect and actually track every single mind and mentality in just for the sake of the safety, but in the reality there's more within it, which I'll later explain more in my argument why the system is actually very dangerous. And then talking about like closing government, talking about control by stakeholder, exactly because why this is a very dangerous thing, because why do citizens give these stakeholders the right to actually control our mind, control our behavior even before we do something, before we do something considered as potentially criminal, but then we give this authority or the right to the stakeholders, that stakeholders could be as flawed as the systems that they use. They could be biased as well to some potential criminal that the system actually detect. So in my argument, I'll be talking about why the system is actually very dangerous, and we don't want it to be implemented in a society just for the sake of the safety itself. Like what the opening opposition has talked to you, like the system is a form of like the system itself is a form of like kind of like suppression, in which like individuals' mind are unable to actually like what's the parameter of consider talking about murder is something that might lead you end up in jail, even just the thought of it. So that is why exactly this is a form of like suppression towards the individual, and it's kind of like stressful. But here in this closing government, I want to talk about why is this actually dangerous, because we say that the Sibyl system is just like a bullshit kind of like introduced by the government, like to like package and branded with a good slogan to actually track crime in people's mind, but like track potential crime in people's mind, resulting in preventing more crime and catch potential crime. But exactly what I want to say to what this is actually clashed with this closing government point, like there's something more within the system that we as a citizen never knew actually what the government implemented. So that's why we never knew what the government intended and programmed in this system. Maybe just a thought of hating your government, of protesting your government, could be considered as a crime or as a criminal, since we never know the parameter of what's considered potential crime by this system, because the government or the stakeholders never actually disclose it to the citizen itself. So that is why it's very dangerous, and it's even more like stressful to the people itself, even because we never knew, maybe just because the thought of just hating your government could result into like program implemented and programmed by the government to actually this system to actually like being something considered as irrespectful and disgraceful to the regime, and that's why you will be put into the jail. Just the thought of hating your government, and this also considered and labeled by the government, by the system as potential criminal, since the government also wants to control its citizen mind, not just for the sake of protecting society's safety, but also wanted to know more what's there in there. And that's all. Proud to oppose the motion.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech. And to close the case from government, I call upon GovWhip. Is GovWhip here? Ron? Hello?
Yeah, same like before. If you have your eye, you can just unmute yourself. And if I'm ignoring you, means that your eye aren't detected. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Continue to my first speaker and going to respond one point coming from the causing oppositions that are actually not telling us why we should not prefer why we should not prefer this just because that government are going only introduce a technology that are just gimmick, and then it is going to manipulate the whole nation, the gentlemen. I think that it's kind of absurd argument coming from the oppositions, and I think that this argument cannot count, because first, government is the body that your society are choose at the very first place. So if your society already choose, that means that you are choosing the right person to lead the nation, the gentlemen. Means that you are not going to recklessly choose the person who are going to just do the nonsense and useless programs at the very first beginning, and also talking about this criminal justice system. It is something that's very important, and it is effect to all kinds of society, aspect in the society. That means that their argument are absurd at very first time, at the very first beginning. Second thing, that if they say that these systems are going to controlling and manipulating, and then also people cannot feel humanity again, I think that they are taken either in the very worst scenario, or they are take it in misconception. Because first, as we are told you, that we are not controlling, we are not only monitor, and we are supervised if there is something wrong happens. Uh, Maybe in the case that, as my first speaker already told you, that we are only response if there is something harmful going to happen. And also the action that we are going to take is step by step, not just directly kill people, or directly imprison people, but we are going to do it first at the soft uh, soft way first, such as like the warning, or the telling you that there is something wrong, and then also taking action step by step instrument. So there so at until this closing debate, we believe that opposition team still cannot give us a reason why we should oppose to this system instrument. So to conclude and to close this debate, I'm going to tell you why our side is the winning side. First, from the opening government already failed to use three things, as my first speaker already told you. They failed to characterize the stakeholder, the actor that are being are in the topic elements, which is the vulnerable actors, such as like our societies, especially the children, the women, are in stake in the problems if we cannot protect them. And also they are failed to characterize and tell us about the problems that we are facing right now. That's why we need the Sibyl system to solve it. Because our closing government already clearly state to you that we want to eradicate the very we want to eradicate the crime that can be happen because of the mentality, and also the crime that possibility can happen because of the psychopath mentality. We want to prevent that, and we will also want to uphold the criminal justice system better and better for in the future. So this with this technology means that we are using the advancements, and we do the improvement to our system. And they're also the opening government also failed to tell us about how important is this, and what they tells you only the assumption, and also not solving the problem why we should prefer this system. So we believe that there is not a lot of contribution coming from opening government. And coming from the opening opposition only tells you that, yeah, uh, opening opposition same like closing a government, closing opposition same like the opening opposition, that they only take this system to the worst case scenario, that they say that this system are going to recklessly kill people, recklessly imprison people without a clear mechanism, without a clear assessment, and they say that government going to have harm to torture their society. That's at very first beginning, and we see that this most likely not going to happen, because in the government consists a lot of people, consists a lot of system, and also consists a lot of uh, law enforcement. As it means that every action that government going to take, there is always a process that called check and balance. Means that government are not going to recklessly only do the things for their intention, and even if these cases are going to happen, we believe that society have a power to riot, have a power to do the social movement, from the grassroots, to riot, to protest to the society itself, such as like we see that in Indonesia, we see that gerakan reformasi di korupsi, how we fail the UU KPK and stuff and so on. We believe that these are going to effective, and these are not, and even though we implement the system, we still can control it, even though our government cannot behave well in this government. But in the other side, that they fail to tell us that why we should not prefer to the system, because what we protect here, what our goal is, we want to protect the vulnerable actors, especially the one who are always become victim in the society just because the psychopath mentality that happened from the person that the police and the prosecutor and our criminal justice system are failed to detect its soul. That's why with this, we believe that opposition cannot upper hand and there is nothing we can take legislation. Yeah. So with this, we are proudly to close the debate. Thank you.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech. Now to close the opposition's case on the debate overall, I call upon the opposition whip.
Check. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Is there any noise from my sound?
No,
back?
no.
Okay. So if you want to POI me, you just unmute yourself. If I do not respond to your POI, means I'm rejected it. You can pronounce my gender pronunciation is he, and I will start my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so grassroots movements from reformasi korupsi, of course, is not really important to really gratefully change our nations to become a more peaceful states, because at the end, the cycle of corruptions, it not end in there, but it successfully portraying the series of events that lead to those kinds of events of reformasi korupsi. We know that from after that event, we know that governments are secretly, lean money from hedge fund that make our country have so much in debt that it leads to the economic crisis and it lead to those reformations. This kind of knowledge of series of events that important to the people, knowing that it will lead to the reformations or grassroots that CG already says. However, with these Sibyl systems, those kind of knowledge about series of events that government are secretly doing that will be vanished. There will be no reformations, and government can do whatever the fuck they want. Whatever they want, if whatever they want without no supervision. That is why those Sibyl systems are. That's why CO are really against that Sibyl system. So let's analyze this debate. I think this debate can be crushed down into analysis point of view. So in terms of the status quo of tracking criminal, why we think is it enough? So in the status quo, we're already arguing that if we want to track a criminal, you need you need a hard evidence, such as you need a weapons, tools that prove this person is deliberately making a criminal to begin with, and also by soft evidence, such as records of behavior from the witnesses, from the person who see that this person will have a potential to do criminal by witnessing that. These kind of things is really important for the police to making some decisions to whether capture the person or not. Why we think this is more important rather than data driven that CG says? Because let's admit that this kind of crime coefficients is only series of assumptions that only series of assumptions. Yes, it's true that is driven by the data and it's driven by the characteristic of persons and calculations. However, those kind of things are need kind of context whether this person will do it in the next future or the next days. This kind of data context is the thing that the government, the Sibyl system is not consider it. For example, why people become psychotic? Let's see the characteristic of the neighborhoods. Oh, it seems that those psychotic people are people living in the neighborhood of slum area. These slum area are making because previously those people are living under a previous one, but those previous one area are being gentrified by the government. For example, then those people move into more cheap area that becomes slum. These kind of context, of course, government know it from the beginning, right? Of course, government know that people will think about protest to begin with. However, with these Sibyl systems, government will going to erase this kind of this kind of protest, and will not affect this important. Look, when people making criminal decisions, it comes from the not only from the individual autonomy to choose how their life will be, whether they were criminal or not, but also the neighborhood that affect them. In this kind of neighborhood, when you are born into a neighborhood that being that been neglected by the government, by the corrupt officials, of course you're going to do that. That is why exists Marvel character like the Punisher, who punish people, who punish those corrupt officials, those who punish corrupt police to begin with, right? Now, with that kind of civil systems, those characters like the Punisher, Marvel, or even those people who do some retaliation crime against corrupt officials will not be there. Yes, it will become a better, like the CG says. However, the reasons that make this kind of retaliations is a series of events, is a series of things that it should be government that fix that from the first place. If the government know that making a debt would lead this country to become economic crisis, and thus would lead a revolutions, government should not do that at the first place, right? But the government still do that. With this kind of civil systems, government will do recklessly this recklessly behavior, because now people will be going to be altered, people minds will be altered, and say that this kind of debt loaning is actually better, while in fact it will make this country to be economic crisis to begin with, right? These kind of things will be vanished, this series of events. Even at second point, this kind of data driven will also create the same bias like in the previous status quo. How is it only to, and it is only to going the bias to get bigger? Why? Because now because previously when people labeling people labeling other as psychotic or what, they only do that because of some assumptions. Now by this kind of data driven, it's really easy to be labeling persons as psychotic or so on. Because now what? Because now these people have a really clear scientific proof to labeling those. This will make this kind of racial of discrimination gap will become higher, and of course government will neglect it at the first place, because they will say this is the tool for them to making separation between people. Now, in second of why the socializing is important. Notice that people have a different mind. Notice that people has ability and bias to being unpredictable. So that's why we share some thoughts. So that's why we socialize and organizing a movement, right? With this kind of things, with this kind of civil systems, because we already have one thing and one clear and one thought, there will be no protest, because the thought will be already the same. There will be no people who think to organize, and this because there will no people organize, government will have no check and balances to begin with, and that's why really oppose these motions. Thank you.
So yeah, apologies if this doesn't make sense. Hopefully this will. If you have any further questions, feel free to chat me, or WhatsApp or whatever. Here goes. So everyone, thank you for the debate. I understand that this is a very niche. Not okay. This is not a really niche motion, because this is actually this can be a very general motion of minority report, or pre-crime sentencing, just with a weep setting. So yeah, basically general comments, decision, and reasoning. So general comments, I feel like a lot of teams suffer from a lack of picturization or portrayal, right? Because this is a very heavy context, not heavy context per se, this is not like an IR motion or something, but there's a heavy context slide. There's a specific scenario happening, right? And there's a specific technology that exists. So I feel like you guys need to paint a picture of the world we're living in, inside of this, where this system exists, right? Are we living in the current world? And if so, what does that mean? If we live in the current world, this means that like government are still imperfect. That means like a lot of people are still, like us, or a lot of people are just like us, or are we living in a completely different world where the government is somewhat more responsible, somewhat more authoritative, somewhat more capable in handling issues, and so on? Like I feel like although this might be like very minor and very like quote unquote not really contributive to the debate overall, but this picturization will help get your argument through. So I encourage everyone to from the get-go just say that, okay, the world we're living in is like this, like A, B, C, D, E, and therefore we think that the existence of Sibyl system in that world will be harmful or will be beneficial. So I feel like a lot of speakers can benefit from that in future motions as well. Okay, so decision. I give the winning to the first to opening opposition, second to closing opposition, third to opening government, and unfortunately fourth goes to closing government. So the way I'm gonna deal with the reasoning is here. I'm going to give a reasoning why I give up bench over Gov, and then I'm going to say why OG is above CG and why OO is above CO. Then because I acknowledged that although the closing debate is a bit derivative, sure, but I still give a clear, like not a clear win, but like a line from two. Sorry, I still give a win for the up bench for two main reasons. First of all, it's the lack of response coming from like the whole government bench to the entire case coming from opposition bench, which I feel like the comparison of response is feels a little bit way to opposition. Then I feel like a lot of the materials coming from opposition is untouched, whereas a lot of the materials coming from government is heavily responded to. But even that, I feel like in inside of the materials coming from government bench, there is a lack of mechanization on how your benefit or your harm operates, and there's a lack of comparative as well. So when you guys say things like, oh yeah, there will be society protection, like I fail to see how then, like what will happen in the comparative. Why are things worse off in your world, or why are the trade-off is worth it? Why the trade-off will be worth it? Like why pre-sentencing a person can be justified. I fail to see that from Gov Bench, as well as from the closing government when you say that humans are unpredictable. Like I also fail to see why then, in contrast, when you have this information, like when you have this information, what the comparatives are, and when you don't have this information, why it's like comparatively far worse, that we need to take this trade-off, considering the fact that opposition has already bring a lot of their trade-offs as well. Okay, so why then is OG above CG? I feel like at the end of the day, CG is a bit derivative to opening government and doesn't really fill in the gap in opening government, right? When you guys talk about things like unpredictability in human nature, it is still a similar line as when opening government tries to bring up their urgency of saying that existing crimes exist. A lot of the times we fail to prevent it. A lot of the times we fail to sentence the people responsible as well, due to some like complicated legal system or whatnot. Like although they don't get to that like complicated legal system explanation, I see that the whole explanation of human nature being unpredictable is still in the same breath as opening government's case. So that is why closing government unfortunately took fourth in this debate as compared to opening government. But eventually, why opening opposition took first as compared to closing opposition in this debate is because at the end of the day, I feel like the materials coming from opening opposition is more inherent to the existence of Sibyl system, wherein they talk about things like this is unjustified because you cannot punish people because of the harms that they haven't done, because their intention is not the same as manifestation. Like those kinds of explanation is more inherent to the existence of Sibyl system as opposed to the existence of a bad government, which is the thing that closing opposition hinges upon, right? Although the harms are valid, like the harms and responses are valid by saying that bad governments exist and bad governments will abuse this. I feel like, and although I also acknowledge that the explanation is a bit extended from the materials coming from the DLO, it still feels like this is not inherent to the existence of the Sibyl system itself, but it is inherent to the existence of bad government. So, but fortunately, this sufficiently clashes with the material coming from opening government, right? So that's why you guys took second, like that's why closing opposition took second as compared to opening government. But unfortunately, that's why you cannot do first. So yeah, the distinction between like opening government, closing government, as well as opening opposition, closing government, closing opposition is a bit close. So other judges might find it differently, but that's the way I decided. That's the way that I adjudicate the debate. If you have any further questions, feel free to approach me. And if not, good luck for other sparrings. Yay.